230. Let's get to the Wolfman remake from 2010, which one reason I wanted to do this is because there's the new remake reboot of it coming out in January. It's directed by Joe Johnston, who also did Jumanji, the first Captain America, Nutcracker in the Four Realms, a very underrated director to me. It stars Benicio del Toro, Anthony Hopkins, Emily Blunt, Asa Butterfield, and the synopsis is: upon his return to his ancestral homeland, an American man is bitten and subsequently cursed by a werewolf. So when this was released, I think, just getting into high school at the time, and I wasn't a big horror fan, but I did really enjoy monster films or just creature features in general. Also, I know that a lot of people don't like this movie. It didn't do that well, financially at least. I think critically it did okay. I think this movie is so underrated. It's not a masterpiece. It's not the best monster film of all time. But as far as remakes go, so interesting, so refreshing. The classical, traditional storytelling and narrative, except it just has updated effects and production. It looks amazing. The main arc of Benicio del Toro, who's this actor, and he goes back home, and his father is this very dominating, dark, abusive father who he doesn't really want to have a relationship with, but the other brother was killed, seemingly by a werewolf. So they're having to reconnect, and then all these dark secrets in their history come out over the course of the movie. Benicio del Toro and Anthony Hopkins are great together, and then Emily Blunt as well. I do agree that there are points that become a little flat, that drag a little bit. It's maybe a little too long in the end and have a few too many plot points that maybe don't need to be there. But for the most part, it flies by. I'm really engaged in the action. The special effects still look really good. All of the real locations, the house, the look of the forests around the village. Talking about specific scenes, though, the gypsy camp attack when Del Toro first gets bitten. The very unsettling look into early psychological healthcare, let's call it, when Del Toro is captured and he's put in the mental institution, then deals with those very dark early practices like dunking him in freezing ice water, or even alluding to various surgeries like lobotomies, that kind of thing. It's very, even though some of it might be a little exaggerated and in your face, I still feel like from my knowledge of that, it's not that far off in how doctors of that time didn't know how to handle most mental conditions, or would think someone would have something and they just treated it with whatever primitive idea they had. The first creation or morphing of Del Toro into the Wolfman in that gypsy cave or tunnel. The reveal of Anthony Hopkins being the, I guess, OG Wolfman, and he was the one that killed Del Toro's brother, or his own son. The flashbacks or dreams that Del Toro has early on when he's walking through the old house, and those visions of his brother as a kid. And going back to the medical part for a second, when he's put on display in the observation room and the doctors are trying to explain to the others about what's going on with him, but then he suddenly turns into the Wolfman and attacks. one of the best action sequences, as well as some of the best visuals, is when he is causing death and destruction throughout London and he's being chased by the cops. Probably one of the only problems I have, not to say it's bad, but the third act, when it becomes mainly a one-on-one battle between Anthony Hopkins and Del Toro as the Wolfman, it's watchable. And I like the fire in the house, but it goes on a little too long. If I were to guess, a lot of the critics, audiences, and critics themselves maybe hate the movie because it doesn't do enough to reimagine the character. I personally, in this case, with how it's executed, it takes those simple, familiar elements and does them really well. Like, I don't have to have a bunch of crazy changes to the character or the story to make it interesting. Honestly, I wish more modern day reboots, remakes of these classic monster tales would take a note from this movie. So there's a lot there to enjoy. While I do have hope for the new film, because I think Lee Whannell is a very strong director and writer. I loved The Invisible Man, and he has had a large part in Saw, and he did Upgrade, a very, very consistently good filmmaker. I miss that we're not going to be getting more films like this set in history like this one is, because I just personally enjoy that more so than seeing things in, at least 9 times out of 10, seeing things in a more modern setting that just isn't as interesting. Because even when I saw this in theaters for the first time, it really left a mark, not only because I thought this is the coolest, most violent monster movie ever, but I feel like even just the tone, that world, that heart, the ideas stuck with me much more so than a lot of others in that same genre. And yeah, that is a heavy 4 out of 5.